author, researcher, and also a founder as yourself. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for having me. My name is Nir Eyal, and I am a behavioral designer. So I help companies build the kind of habits uh, and services that improve people's lives through healthy habits. So I'm the author of two books. The first is called Hooked: How to Build Habit Forming Products. And that's a book that kind of steals the secrets of the Silicon Valley giants like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, Slack, TikTok, and makes the psychology of what these products of how these products get us hooked accessible to founders, product leaders in all sorts of industry to frivolity, to not just gaming and social media, but to how we can get people hooked to healthy habits in their lives. So I work with a lot of companies in fintech and educational products and health services, anywhere where the business model depends upon repeat customer engagement and the customer would benefit from these healthy habits. So that's my first book. My second book is called Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. And all about how do we build good habits in our lives. Indistractable is about how do we break the bad habits. And we can have our cake and eat it too. I believe that we can use a way that serves us as opposed to hurts us by making sure that we can get the best out of technology by using it to build healthy habits, along with breaking the bad habit that can so often lead us towards distraction.
Amazing. So, you start out your career as a consultant and later went on your own businesses. And you also talk experience throughout the books. So could you share a little bit more about how those experiences shaped you in the beginning of your career?
Yeah, so I always enjoyed writing, but I of it because many reasons. But when I graduated from college, I decided to go into consulting. I worked in the Boston Consulting Group for a few years and hated it. It was a very difficult experience, and well, I loved it for a while. And my boss changed, and then I started hating it. And I actually talk about that in the book Indistractable, about how Boston Consulting Group used to be this. When I remember it, it was a very difficult culture. It was, you were expected to be available 24/7, constantly distracted, constantly pulled in all directions. Actually made a pretty big transformation. And I talk about that transformation in my book about how they've become an indistractable workplace. They went from being a company that people consistently rated as a very difficult place to work at with a terrible work culture to now really a place that's consistently rated as one of America's best places to work. And they made this so that that experience at BCG taught me a lot. It taught me that I didn't want to work at a big company and entrepreneur, and it gave me the some of the skills that I used to start my first business, which was in the solar energy business. I started a company that was later acquired by a private equity firm. Then I went to business school at Stanford, and while I was there, I started another company, and that company was from Kleiner Perkins, and it was okay. It was an acquihire, but that company was in the gaming and advertising space, and it gave me this vantage point of seeing many of these companies. I was in the right place at the right time in Silicon Valley from 2006 to 2016. Companies that we think of today as these world-changing companies, I had this front row seat to see how they were so good at changing consumer behavior. And many of these people who started these companies were my friends, my clients, some of them my classmates, and I could ask them questions around how they did, right? What is it that makes these products so darn sticky? And when I was thinking about what my next company would do, I knew that I had to build a habit. And the reason I knew that, it was even back in 2012 when my second company was acquired. I could tell that we were changing as we went from desktop to laptop to mobile devices to wearables and now to auditory devices like the as the interface shrank and eventually disappeared, habits would become increasingly important because there just isn't the real estate to trigger people with what we call these external triggers, these visual notifications to tell them what to do. It's easy to do when you have a big desktop screen, but what if you have a little mobile phone on that home screen? If the consumer doesn't remember to use your product might as well not even exist, right? So you have to build a consumer habit. Interface shrinks, your product becomes less relevant. And so when I looked out there for, hey, where's a book on how to build habit forming products? I didn't find such a book. So I started researching and writing and talking to my friends at these companies, as well as my former professors at Stanford, and spent a lot of time at the Stanford library researching academic literature on building habit forming products. And that I started blogging about this. And after a few years, one of my Shiv reached out and he says, "Hey, I've been reading your blog. I really like it. I love this hooked model you've developed. Let's teach a class together." So he invited me to teach Stanford at the GSB. And then later I moved over to the Hasso Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. And then through that curriculum, that became my first book, Hooked. And I started speaking and consulting and investing. Actually, that's been the most lucrative part of writing the book, was that I get a lot of interest in the Hook model and call me up and say, "Hey, we're using your model. What do you think?" And I talk to hundreds of companies every year. Uh, Office hours every week, and so I talk to 4 companies every week, so that's over 200 companies a year. And then every once in a while, right, I find a company that I think this is an amazing use of the Hook model. Can I invest? And so professionally, that's really what I do. Is I look for companies Hook model, and if they'll have me, if they think I can be helpful, then I'll invest. And so far, that's been great. I've invested in 35 companies so far, 6 unicorns. So pretty good hit rate, and so I'm going to continue to do that. And so yeah, that's my professional story to date. I hope that answered your question.
So how did you go about, you know, putting together the decision to be an author, right? Because it's one thing to be thinking about these problems, it's another thing to be a user or designer, but to sit down, do the research, and put it together as a thesis, how does that happen?
Yeah, so my guiding motivation has always been to follow my curiosity, to scratch my own, write books that I need. When I have a problem in my life, I'll talk to my wife about it. I'll talk to my good friends about it. If I factory answer, I'll read books about it. And 9 times out of 10, the answer will already be somewhere, right? Somebody will have researched the I'm having because they've had the problem before. But every once in a while, right, about once every 5 years, there's a problem that I read all the books on the topic. It doesn't solve my problem. And so that's what happened with Hooked, my first book. I couldn't find any book that specifically addressed how do you build habit forming out there about how to build personal habits, but that's not what I was looking for. I wanted to find a resource for how do I design products to you build a product that people use because they want to, not because they have to. I didn't find such a book before Hooked, so I decided to write it myself. The same, I read tons of books about focus and distraction and attention, and they all kind of said surface level analysis of it's all technology's fault, right? You're the victim. Well, stop using email, stop checking social media. Well, thanks. That's like kind of advice that only a professor who has tenure can give, because most will lose our jobs if we stop using technology. That's stupid. And I don't want to be a victim. I want to use these tools. I want to use these technologies. They're wonderful. But a way to use these tech tools in a way that served me, as opposed to feeling like I was serving them. And so when none of these techniques work, many of the techniques, if you don't understand the deeper psychology, it doesn't last for long. So I really want to dive into the deeper psychology of why we get distracted in the first place. And so that's always been my central motivator to why I write. Frankly, I'm thrilled that I've sold over 1 million copies of my books. Real joy of writing these things is to solve my own problems, and I've got lots of problems. So it's fun to be able to study something enough, build for yourself. And by the way, that's the advice I give entrepreneurs all the time too. That it's a huge competitive advantage, as opposed to building for some amorphous person. It's much better. Your rates of success are going to be much higher if you build something that you yourself want. At least then you can't fail, because you've a market size of one once. You're the market. So you might not be financially successful with the product, but who cares? At the end of the day, you built the product because you believe it needs to exist in the world. And that's why I write my books as well, because I need the solutions I'm writing about.
When I read your books, what it reminded me of was another book called Salt, Sugar, Fat. And it talks about the food industry and how
Hmm.
there's billions of dollars of R&D and work to make, potato chips and Pringles and all these delicious things be, frankly, irresistible, right? In many ways, right? And I think that framing was, quite eye-opening from a, I think, framework perspective, but also how it could play out. And I think I definitely noticed a lot more of these habit loops that happen as a result. I think what was interesting at the end of it is, I think there's a lot of pessimism, right? And I think that's what your second book is kind of like tackling. But I think people feel like they're surrendering, right? They're like, you know what? Just I'm on TikTok, I'm doom scrolling, that's it. I try to be better. And if they try to be better, my joke is that they end up, going to somewhere else, right? They're complaining about it on Reddit, or on Facebook, that they're stuck on TikTok, which is, a somewhat healthier version, I guess, perhaps arguably. So how do you see that happening? Do you feel like as the world continues to like be in this arms race of increasingly habit forming requirements, and it does feel like there's a little bit of a power law, even dynamic, right, to innovation there. What do you
Mhm.
think is the end state of that for human focus and wisdom?
Well, I think that there's a bifurcation happening in the world today, that there are people who let their time and attention and their diet, as you say, be controlled by others. And there are people who stand up and say, no, I will decide for myself. And so we have to gain this skill. The price of progress is that things get better. Would we want it any other way? I read I appreciate his writing. I think he's a wonderful writer, but it's very much this victim mentality without addressing the central issue, which is alternative. Do we want to go back to a world where food was scarce and not delicious? No, I want Cheetos. Delicious? Yes. Do I want to eat them all the time? Yes, but that doesn't mean I have to eat them all the time. And I used to be clinically obese. I ate a lot of Cheetos in my day, a lot of donuts, and a lot of unhealthy food. And as easy as it is, and I used to do this all the time, to blame the things outside of us, right? Just, oh my gosh, it's all food's fault. It's social media's fault. It's the television's fault. It's all these forces outside of us to be what's called a blamer. That is not very productive, because there has always been distraction. Distraction is nothing new, right? It's nothing that was suddenly created. We know that talked about this problem 2,500 years ago, right? 2,500 years before Cheetos, before the internet, people were complaining about doing things that they later regret. So this is not a new problem. So being a blamer is not the right solution. The other path that many people take is to be what's called a shamer. A shamer doesn't blame things outside themselves. They shame themselves. They say, "Oh, I must be broken. Oh, you see, I have an addictive personality. I have a short attention span. I have undiagnosed ADHD. I'm a Sagittarius." You name it. They somehow think that they are broken. But that doesn't work either, because believing that somehow you are broken leads to more of these uncomfortable sensations, which we then try to escape with, guess what? More distraction. So when I was clinical, I didn't, I wasn't clinically obese because food was delicious. I would have loved to blame fast food and these companies, like Michael Moss does. And it's these food companies that are making us eat these things. They're literally shoving the food down our throats. No, that's not why I was obese. You know why I was obese? Because I was eating my feelings. When I was bored, I would eat. When I was lonely, I would eat. When I felt ashamed about how much I had just eaten. So shaming yourself is not the right answer. Blaming others is not the right answer. The right answer is not to be a blamer or a shamer. The right answer is to be a claimer. What does a claimer do? A claimer claims responsibility not for how they feel, respond to those feelings. This is a very important point. Most people don't realize that you do not control your urges. You don't control your urges. Eat junk food, the urge to check social media, the urge to get distracted. You do not control those urges any more than you would control the urge to sneeze. If you feel the urge to sneeze, it's too late. You've already felt that urge. You can't do anything about that urge. What you can do something about is how you respond to that urge. When you feel the urge to sneeze, do you sneeze all over everyone and get them sick? No, that's not the right thing to do. That's not the You don't sneeze over others. You take out a handkerchief and you cover your face, and that's the responsible thing to do, right? The term responsibility comes to respond to a situation. So a claimer claims responsibility for what they will do in response to sensations. Most people, distractible people, when they feel discomfort, when they feel boredom, loneliness, uncertainty, anxiety, they want to escape it. And we're somehow told in society that feeling bad is bad. We're constantly told this message. If you feel the slightest ache or discomfort, quick, take a pill, quick, find some kind of solution, do anything to escape discomfort. Bullshit. Discomfort is a condition, and high performers learn how to deal with discomfort. This is a huge point in my book and a revelation for me. It's helped every conceivable facet of my life. Desire to escape discomfort. All human motivation, if you look inside the human brain, everything we do from a neuro is to remove discomfort, even the desire to feel good, even the pursuit of pleasure. Craving, lusting, all these things are psychologically destabilizing. So what does this mean? If all human motivation is driven by a desire to escape discomfort, that must therefore mean that time management is pain management. Let me say that again. Time management is pain management. I would go further. Management is pain management. Money management is pain management, because all human behavior is driven by a desire to escape discomfort. So we need to be comfortable with discomfort. We need to realize that feeling bad is not bad. It's about how we will respond to that discomfort. Look, we don't have any other choice. Are we going to sit here and say, hey, food companies, please make your food less delicious because I want to eat it all the time? Netflix, make your shows less interesting. I find myself wanting to watch them. Apple, can you make your phones less user-friendly? Come on, this is ridiculous. We keep blaming and shaming, we're not going to get anywhere. We have to start claiming responsibility for how we will respond. This is the only way to become indistractable. That I mentioned earlier, between people who will allow their time and attention and their lives to be controlled by others, and people who say, no, I will not to control my attention. I am going to control my life because I am going to become indistractable.
Thanks for sharing. Love what you discuss about, the human condition and calling bullshit on the, industry practices, and how, pain management is, kind of what we have to do. I too also used to be clinically obese a few years ago. And I feel like my solution was, talking about Greek philosophy, was like a pantheon, right? I ran in the other direction and I prayed at the god of fitness, and I voted with my feet, right? By subscribing on Instagram to fitness and health, leaving breadcrumbs to newsletters on health and fitness and nutrition. So I ran the other direction to, looking for Noom, which is another habit forming product, Fitbit,
Mm-hmm.
Apple Watch, etc., to do that. So it does feel like Indistractable. I was reading it. And is that actually that neutral space where, I think you master yourself, but it almost feels like the world's almost like polarizing, right? It's like, it's either you're with the fast food industry in that sense, or you're worshiping at the exercise and fitness and personal health industry, right?
Not necessarily apologist, right? There's lots of bad stuff that the food industry does, that the tech industry does, that they need to be held account for. And I'm not saying we should use these things more, quite the opposite, right? You should definitely be mindful about how you use these things. What I'm rallying against is saying, it's the government that needs to fix this problem for me. Why doesn't the government just pass laws to regulate this stuff? Let's regulate fast food. Let's regulate social media. Let's regulate this stuff. Well, what happens when the geniuses in government get their hands on industry? They screw it up, right? That's what happens. I mean, go to Europe and try and use the internet. Push these goddamn buttons a million times to freaking let you use a web page. This GDPR regulations that are supposed to protect people do nothing but annoy the hell out of us. Mess it up every time. They mess it up. Now, there is room for good regulation when it comes to protecting children. Absolutely. We definitely need to protect children. When it pathologically addicted, absolutely, we need to protect those people too, because they are people who are not operating in their sound body and mind. But for the rest of us, it's a personal responsibility issue. We got to do something about this ourselves. What are we going to sit here and say, I'm going to wait for fast food to make their food less delicious? I'm media to make their products less interesting? It's not going to happen. What choice do we have? So as opposed to blaming and shaming, We need to claim. We need to start doing else. Now, and that might mean not using many of these products, right? There are many foods I won't eat because I know they're really right. But that doesn't mean I want them banned. I think I should have the option to eat Twinkies and Cheetos if I want. I want to live in that kind of world, just like where, if I wanted to smoke a cigarette, I could, but I choose not to because, I know it's very unhealthy. And frankly, who doesn't know that cigarettes aren't like, it boggles my mind why anybody would smoke today. I mean, does anybody, almost anybody on planet Earth, really, you don't know that it's for you? But it's not up to me to tell you you can't smoke, right? It's a personal choice. I'm not going to be the person who says we should ban all cigarettes forever. I think a little bit extreme, but I do think obviously there is room for regulation for people who can't make sound decisions.
That's great because we almost see those two trends, right? We see the banning of cigarettes in New Zealand for future generations, and then we also see the legalization of cannabis, right? Across the world as
Yeah,
well. And so
which
these
is
are
ridiculous
two.
because
Yeah.
we know that cannabis, 15% of people who smoke cannabis have what's called a cannabis use disorder, right? They literally get addicted to cannabis, and cannabis is way worse smoking because it doesn't have a filter. Because most joints don't have filters the way cigarettes do. So okay, there's controversy there about, well, you don't smoke as much cannabis as you do cigarettes, but per joint, a joint has way more carcinogens than a cigarette. So yeah, it's kind of ironic that we want to regulate cannabis at the same time that we want to regulate social media. It seems a little silly.
If only social media came in a joint, right? Then it'd be more
That's right.
obvious.
And by the way, just to be clear, I do think there is room for some regulation, right? I think, for example, scary, right? I don't think if a foreign government were to come in and want to control the New York Times, right? Let's just say somebody, name country, some billionaire in some country was going to come in and say, I'm going to buy the New York Times. The American government would not allow that. It's just too much of an influential platform. Somehow TikTok, which we know the laws in China allow a real undue amount of influence onto that platform. Now, we don't have much evidence against that. So, let's make sure the record's clear. But the fact that they could is scary, but not because the product is necessarily engaged. It's a product with a huge potential audience. So there is room for regulation, but I think what will not be regulated away is the engaging. Okay. We want products to be engaging. We want products to be designed in a way that makes us want to use them. That's the point. That's not a problem. So I think in that respect, it's up to us. There's lots of other things we should regulate when it comes to, undue influence and in elections, things like that, and certainly protection of children. But when it comes to the basic question of, hey, is a product quote unquote it's not that simple, right? Because anything is potentially addictive. We know that any analgesic, literally anything that solves pain, is potentially addictive to someone. There's cases of people getting addicted to eating paint. There's people who get addicted. There's people who get addicted to literally drinking water. There are reported cases of people getting addicted, unhealthily addicted to drinking water. That's not water's fault. Confluence of factors, right? People who have addiction, it's a pathology, it's a disease. Unfortunately, we've medicalized other behavior and moralized otherwise normal behavior to make it not our problem, right? I check TikTok too much. I look at Instagram too much. That's the technology's doing it to me. You see, they're addicting me. It's not my problem. It's not my fault. I can't do anything about it, and that is actively harmful. So that they're quote unquote addicted when they're not, right? Addiction is a pathology, it's a disease. When you believe that there's nothing you can do, that your your focus is being stolen and your brain is being hijacked, if you believe that rubbish, guess what happens? Well, nothing. Because how can I? It's not my, I have no agency here, right? Me. And so that's what I'm fighting against. I'm trying to tell people that you do have agency, you do have control. As two formerly obese people I can share on this episode, that when you start taking some small steps and first and foremost believe you have the power to do something about it, you can change your behavior, you can change your life. The worst thing you can do is to believe, well, there's nothing I can do, I'm powerless.
So much to cover. Uh, Frankly, I agree with you about TikTok. I mean, I think you zoomed in that there were like three pillars I really enjoyed. Like being a dad with daughter, there was content they showed me. They showed me bilingual jokes. And then thirdly, they showed me a whole bunch of like Singapore crime and history clips, right? And I was just like consuming so much content that's there. And one thing I realized was that at some point I realized that you know, I was in an app full of ghosts, right?
Mm,
Like these are all people. They look like human, but it's an algorithm. It's a robot talking to me, puppeteering ghosts. These people could, all be dead, for example. you know,
mm, mm.
and that TikTok algorithm will continue to serve me all this great content, right? Um, so, but it feels like you're saying is you're not against them being thoughtful about their habit forming product design. What you're most concerned about is regulation in terms of foreign slash country control. And then secondly, protecting children. Is that how you would go about regulating TikTok?
Right. So I think that wouldn't let her walk into a bar and order a gin and tonic. She's right. And so we have special laws to protect children from certain behaviors that are potentially harmful because they're not of sound body and mind. So that's number one. Number are pathologically addicted. So I've been advocating for years now that companies that know who are the people who are actually addicted. Now, I like to use it a lot. I'm talking about the people who are pathologically addicted. Okay, now what does that look like? What I want companies to do is to have some kind of an abuse policy. They should have some kind of number that says, hey, if you use our product X number of hours, let's say 30 hours a week, doesn't matter, make up the number. If you use the product this many hours per week, you set off an alarm, you get a message that says, hey, we see that you are product in a way that may indicate you're struggling with an addiction. Can we help? Right? Not necessarily kicking you off, but saying, look, and by the way, this is about the population, the real, real extreme users. This isn't, oh, I like to, go on TikTok for 30 minutes a day or something. This is people who are really addicted, using this to the point where it's harming them. And so that's a place where I think companies do have a special responsibility because they know how much you're using. The alcohol manufacturers, they don't know. How do they know who the alcoholics are? How could they reach out and say, hey, you're drinking too much? But these tech companies, the gaming companies, the social media companies, they know. They have personally identifiable information to know exactly how many hours a day you're spending on their platforms. So I believe they should reach out for that real, 3 to 5 top percent and say, hey, you may be struggling with addiction. How can we help? Can you use these tools? Limit your use. Here's how to use, by the way, our phones today, I have this on my devices, these time limits, so for example, on my phone for the reasons we previously discussed. But for example, Instagram is a very sticky product. I really enjoy using Instagram, but I have this time limit, a certain time of day. And my phone tells me, okay, you're approaching 30 minutes a day. That's enough. And it's wonderful. It works great. But if you're the kind of person who's spending hours and hours, I become special responsibility to reach out to you and see how they can help and perhaps suggest some of these resources or counseling, etc. This third category, I think, has to do with, so in many ways, I trust uh, the CCP a lot less than I would trust or Google or these tech companies in the States, because I know what their incentives are, right? I know what Google's incentives are. I know what Amazon's incentives are. I know what Meta's incentives are. They just want to make money. Okay. I really truly believe that all this political garbage they wish they could ignore. They just want to make money. And so I think that's what scares me about a company where we don't know their motives. We don't know what's behind the scenes. There is the opportunity to undue influence. All TikTok has to do is just to show you just a few more things in your feed, this algorithmically fed feed of pro-China content, suppress some of the protests. And we know that they've definitely done this inside China. And if you need any more evidence, American made technology is banned in China. You can't use Facebook in China. You can't use, Google. You can't use YouTube. All is already banned, and somehow their technology is not banned here. So that's weird. That set up some red flags, and we already see this in America. We already know that many on the state level, many municipalities are banning TikTok on government issued phones. And I think, and I hope, and I advocate for more regulation, if not outright ban. I'm not sure an outright ban, at least regulation around what can and can't be done, because this can all happen in the shadows, right? It could already be happening and we would not know, because there's zero transparency to know, hey, are they putting their fingers on the algorithm a little bit to influence content one way or the other? We would have no clue.
So I think definitely you see a government role in terms of regulating undue influence. For the use and abuse policy, do you believe the industry can reach that self-regulation dynamic, or would that also require government intervention or incentivization to make that happen?
Yeah, I've been advocating it for about 8 years now. I wrote an article exactly saying this, that this is what companies should do, stating very clearly that we have to protect children, we have to protect people who are pathologically addicted. For the rest of us, it's a personal responsibility issue. So that's 95 to 97% of us. It's on us. For that small, it's something that that these companies should do. And to date, they haven't done anything. And I've given up. Frankly, I think government needs to step in and say a use and abuse policy to protect people who are overusing your product. Now, of course, the industry is going to say that's not fair. The news companies, the television, the newspaper, right? Who's going to tell you from the New York Times, hey, stop reading the paper so much, go have a life, right? Or Fox News is going to tell you you've watched too much TV, go do something with your life. They're not going to tell you that either, and they have a point. But account is, yeah, but right? The cable companies, the New York Times, at least not in their paper format, they don't know who the news junkies are. They can't take a break. But these tech companies do know. And if you do know, I think you have a responsibility. So yeah, in that respect, I do think that the tech companies done this themselves deserve to be regulated in this way.
And what's interesting is that you have this really global outlook, right? You have obviously worked across America, you work across the world, and also across Southeast Asia, right? So, what would you say are the differences globally in terms of the understanding, for example, at one level of habit forming products, and also the next layer in terms of controlling attention and even government regulation? What are the global and regional differences you're seeing?
So it's interesting. I think U.S. companies, just by their very nature, are very U.S. focused. The amount of resources that companies devote to moderation of content in some places is much greater than others. I think we've seen examples of in the past. I think it's been corrected, but I don't know. I don't have an inside perspective of really negligence by some of these social media companies not having moderation in place to cut off violence. We saw this happen in Myanmar. We've seen this happen in a few places now. Understand they've really beefed up that effort to make sure that doesn't happen again. So maybe this is part of the growing pains of a company that quickly. I think there's also different standards. So what you can say in America is very different from what you can say in Singapore. And so in Singapore, there's certain things you can't say about people's racial or ethnic origin or religious affiliation. You can absolutely say in America, but you, because of Singaporean law, you can't say here. And I'll tell you, when I'm still struggling with this, because I think I came in Singapore, and when I first came here, I was kind of a free speech absolutist and thought, well, we need to talk about this stuff. We need social debate with each other. That's how we get better. That's the public square. And I have to tell you now, I'm not so sure. I think I wonder if there's even in the United States, even though it's considered the First Amendment is the most important, right, part of the Bill of Rights around freedom of speech. But even that is limited, right? There's certain speech that is not legal. You can't shout fire in a crowded theater. For example, that is illegal. That is not protected speech. But in Singapore, there is speech that is also regulated. That now I'm starting to think, well, there's some good reasons for that, right? Do we really need to criticize each other's race and religion? Like maybe the things that people can't change at that speech. So I'm still struggling with this. I wish I had a better answer. But it seems like, from what I understand, the social media companies are doing a pretty decent job of abiding by local regulation. At least I haven't seen any big mess ups since Singapore. I think it was October of 2021 that they passed this new legislation requiring even more moderation by the social media companies, and it seems like they've kept up. And so I wonder, if maybe there maybe there's a lot of wisdom in encouraging debate, right? We want freedom of expression. We want people to talk about issues, but maybe there are certain issues that are just not worth it, right? Like maybe things that people can't change, right? You don't try, I won't try and change yours. Maybe maybe that's okay.
Yeah, definitely see, I think, precedents for that all across the world, right? Even in Germany, for example, there are limits on free speech that, I think is a function of the country's, history and,
Yeah.
fears, right? And ideals.
That I actually disagree with. So I'm Jewish, and my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. Defend the right to deny the Holocaust. It's obviously ridiculous. It's not true. The Holocaust absolutely did happen. My grandmother will tell you, but she's passed, but she could tell you all kinds of stories about exactly what she experienced at the camps. But I do think we should allow that type of speech, because that's a we can debate that, and that's going to exist under the in the shadows no matter what. But I wonder if you know, extreme. I also, of course, I think what China does in terms of banning everything that people talk about, to the where you can't criticize any type of government intervention. That's also ridiculous, right? To the point where people have to protest with white pieces of paper. It's even now, and so what do? They banned paper. I mean, that's obviously ridiculous. But maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe if the United States is way on one end and China is way on the other, then maybe there's somewhere in the middle that makes sense. Is okay to not talk about in the public square. By the way, another area that I think the U.S. lacks on is our libel laws. Our libel and slander laws. Like, you can literally say anything about a public. If you tweet something, even, then you are. They can say anything about you. You can, if you're a politician, they can in the newspaper in America that Joe Biden got abducted by aliens, and you can put that in print, and that's totally fine. It doesn't have to be way, shape, or form just because you're a public figure. That's something you can't do in Singapore, which also maybe there's some logic there too. I don't know. Maybe if you have a claim about, should be some basis of fact behind it. Again, I'm not arguing exactly the particulars of how the law is implemented. I think it can be abused as well. Since I've been here, my mind has been open to perhaps there are some forms of speech that shouldn't quite be so accountability.
I think accountability is a big word they use over and over again, right? Personal accountability versus accountability, in terms of the public square versus accountability in the face of government. So why is this accountability and personal ownership important to you?
Because I think it's the point of greatest leverage. So when you assign who should act, whose responsibility is something, always ask yourself, who is the party that has the most leverage in changing the situation? I'll give you an analog here. Let's say you're driving, and there's a car in front of you, right? And that car in front of you quickly slams on the brakes for whatever reason. Okay, they quickly slam on the brakes. Whose fault is it if the car in front of you? The fault is the driver in front, because they quickly slammed on the brakes, right? They did something they should not have. Highway, you don't slam on your brakes. But whose responsibility is it? It's the driver in behind, right? The driver behind has to maintain the car in front. And if they hit the car in front of them, guess who's going to get the ticket? It doesn't matter if the driver in front slammed on the brakes. The is responsible. Their insurance will have to pay the fine. And so this is exactly back to your question. Harp on personal accountability is because who has the easier time of fixing the situation? You do, right? Pick up your phone, things. Read Indistractable. Learn how to use these products and services in a way that serves you as opposed to you serving them. It's a point of leverage than sitting here and waiting for the government or these companies to fix the problem. And so that's why I keep harping on it. So the takeaway here is, just because something is fault doesn't mean it's not your responsibility. Something is not, I mean, you didn't invent these things, right? You didn't invent Cheetos, you didn't invent donuts, you didn't invent social media, but it is your responsibility.
It's tricky because personal responsibility seems to be increasingly coded, right, for politics and partisanship. And I think at a deep level, on a personal level, I think everybody gets it, right? And I think every parent and every family and every personal conversations pretty straightforward, right? Like we are accountable for how we drive and we are accountable for how we respond to anything, right? It just feels like once it kind of like gets out there, one zone, two zones, three zones out, then it just becomes, you know, us versus them, right? If you believe in this, da 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 da. So why do you think that's happening from your perspective? How do we navigate that?
Well, the brain is a cognitive miser who jump to quick answers and easy conclusions because that feels good, right? We always want easy answers. For there's all kinds of ridiculous things that people believe because they seem right, right? For most of human history, people thought the world. You had to really convince them. Even today, you have to convince people that the world is not flat because that requires some cognitive effort. Look, it looks flat. I say everything I said. Look, it's flat. But you have to do an experiment. You have to, take a laser and go very far away and shoot it through a little hole, and then you'll see that the laser won't go through the hole that's very far away because of the curvature of the Earth. So you have to think a little bit. You have to devise an experiment. You have to test your assumptions. And the fact is, assumptions. We're very comfortable thinking in ways that make us look good, right? Nobody wants to think that. Wait a minute. Think about this. Can't I just complain? That's no fun, right? Like that sucks. I don't want to think that I can do something to lose weight. I don't want to think that I can do something to change my the way I interact with products and services. That it can't be my fault, right? That's no fun. That's why. I mean that's one. The second thing I think that's unique about technology specifically and social media in particular is that the mediums telling you that it's not your fault have a financial incentive to do so. Like where are people getting the information that technology is melting their brain? Where are they hearing that it's hijacked? Heard in the Social Dilemma film, right? That was on Netflix, where we have people in the movie saying technology is hijacking your brains. Hijacking is what they did to us on 9/11. To use the word hijacking to describe I play Candy Crush too much is offensive. It's not hijacking your brain. It's a distraction. You like it, so you use it a lot, right? And by the way, who brought you the Social Dilemma? Netflix brought you the movie. Right? Like Reed Hastings, the CEO, says that the competitor to Netflix is sleep. Right? The New York Times tells you how horrible, because guess what? They're losing market share to social media. Fox News and CNN hate new media. They hate social media. They hate getting your news from Substacks. All they want to do is tell you how terrible technology is because their business model is the same business model. They're selling your attention to advertisers. Does anybody not know that that's how the media makes money? They sell your attention to advertisers the same way that social media does. The second thing we need to consider is that, the people bringing you this information are in the same damn business. So of course they have an incentive. Not that it's like, oh, a big plot, right? They're not like sitting there and plotting how can we do something to get people to stop using social media. But, it's part of their DNA. It's part of the, and I work journalism. I was a journalism co-major. I worked at CBS. I worked at the New York Times. Like I know how these companies operate. The first rule of news media it leads. They want to show you that's sensational. They want to show you the stuff that spreads, the viral content. They don't care if it's high quality. They don't care if it's what you want you to click. It's the same business model. So of course, I'm not surprised that that many people have a warped perception because that's what we're told again and again and again. Repeat a message. Technology is addictive. Technology is hijacking your brain. It's stealing your focus. Well, the more people believe it, unfortunately, and they don't question these assumptions.
The tricky part, of course, is it's happening. It's already happening. It keeps happening, right? So how should people react to this, right? I mean, it feels like it's just going to keep snowballing, right? It's like, I don't think the media is going to stop, leading with those
Right.
articles. It's just going to escalate it further. You know, I guess another way of saying is, do you just yeah, go ahead.
And technology is going to become more pervasive and more persuasive, right? Technology is only going to get better. It's only going to become more potential. Sorry, I cut you off there.
Well, you pretty much said what I was going to say, right? Yeah, the core of it. It feels like, you know, technology is in this arms race racing ahead, and humans are kind of like, I don't know, holding a stone club and bow and
Well, yes
arrow.
and no. I mean, we oftentimes hear this argument of like, oh, the primal brain is not equipped for modern distraction. Once again, bullshit. There's, the thing that the human brain better than any other species on the face of the earth at doing is adaptability, right? Murder is the most natural thing ever. Each other left and right all the time. But then you know what? We realized that wasn't good for us to keep murdering each other. And we started organizing societies and laws, and we gave power away from us as individuals to government to become the Leviathan that then regulates how we behave to each other. So we don't okay. Rape is historically throughout the canon, right? We know that this would happen all the time. All kinds of other terrible things to each other that we don't do anymore, right? We learn new behaviors. So what the human species does when it comes to new technology, adapt and we adopt. We adapt our behaviors to these new changes. We change the way, which is what Indistractable is all about. It's this new skill set. Okay, so you want to be able to communicate with people all over the world. You want the world's information at your fingertips. You want constant entertainment for free. Well, the cost of all that is learning some new skills, folks. Sorry. Like if you want to learn, if you want to drive a car, you have to learn how to drive the car. And so you need some basic skills. And so the same goes when it comes to our technology. We got to learn some skills. That's what Indistractable does. So the first thing we do is we adapt our behaviors. We adapt these new norms around how we use these products and services. The second thing, we adopt new technologies to fix the last generation of bad technologies. So Paul Virilio, the philosopher, said, you invent the shipwreck. Okay, when you invent the ship, you invent the shipwreck. So of course, any disruptive tech has this massive impact on the world is going to have shipwrecks. There's going to be bad sides to it as well. Every technology that has this kind of impact is going to have goods and bads. When it comes to shipping, when was the last time you heard of a shipwreck? Pretty rare. You don't really hear about shipwrecks anymore. Why is that? Did we stop sailing ships? Did we ban shipping? No, we made shipping better. We adopted new technology. We don't sail ships with, massive Columbus used. No, we have better technology today that makes shipwrecks less common. So that's exactly what we need to do with all these technologies. So that's what we see already, right? I don't know anybody under 30 that still uses Facebook Blue, right? The Facebook proper. Now they're all, okay, they use WhatsApp, and I know WhatsApp is owned by Meta. But I would argue that Instagram fixed lots of the problems of Facebook. It's a better version. And now we see this continue. There are new versions that it gets better and better. It continues to evolve. And that's what human beings have always done. We adapt our behaviors, our norms, and we adopt new technology to fix the last generation of technology.
You speak about this generation and the next generation, right? And Generation Z is upon us. And my children who have been recently born over the past 2 years, I guess there'll be Generation Alpha, right? I guess I don't know what they're going to call them. That's my guess. So when you peep into your crystal ball a little bit about technology improving, all these products changing, how do you envision the next generation kind of like growing up, what their world will be, and what their relationship with technology is going to be?
Yeah, so this is a really important point. And she's very much a digital native. I think some of her first words were iPad time, iPad time. So it's incredibly to think about our children, starting with how do we raise indistractable children. So there's a whole chapter in the book about how to raise indistractable kids, and it starts with first asking ourselves, what kind of example are we setting? That many of us, myself included, I used to be a hypocrite. I would tell my daughter this and that on her phone, and meanwhile I was checking email. You can't do that. If you want to raise indistractable kids, you have to be indistractable yourself. Children are born with hypocrisy detection devices. They have these little invisible antennas that you can't see, but they're there, that are constantly looking for it. and they love to call you out on it. And so they're looking, right? They're constantly watching you. By the way, this is the same if you're a manager at your, tell your employees to focus and not be distracted. If you're constantly checking your device and you're the big boss who constantly is on their phones, you're setting an example. That's the first thing we have to do. We have to learn how to become indistractable ourselves and to be vulnerable with our kids and to tell them, look, I'm struggling with this as well, that these products are designed to be very enticing, hooked. And so I can tell you, I wrote the book, I know all their tricks, and I can tell you they're good. They're not that good, right? It's not mind control, hijacking your brain. This is clearly something we can do something about. And so we need to evolve our kids in learning the same exact process because, as you said, the world is only going to become a more distracting place. And so this is the most important skill. It's more important than teaching them swimming and ballet and Mandarin and all the skills we teach them. If they don't have the skill to focus their attention, it's all for naught, right? Look, in a few years, many of the skills that they are going to be pointless. We're going to have blabble fishes in our ears that are going to translate a language. There's really no point to learning any other language but code because years, our kids will talk, go to some other country and they'll be able to converse just like we are now in different languages. But the skills that they really will skill to acquire new skills, right? And that skill is the skill of becoming indistractable. This is the skill of the century because if you can't attention long enough to learn a new skill, you don't truly control your life. So this is the skill of the century. Our kids have to learn how to do this.
And you shared about sharing about being a good example for kids and so forth. On that personal note, could you share with us a time that you personally have been brave?
Time when I've been brave. I need to think about that one. That's that's a hard one. You know, it's tough for me to share when I mess up, but I know it's necessary. So in my book, I talk about how the impetus to write this book in the first place was I was with my daughter one afternoon and we had just some daddy daughter time planned. And I remember we had this activity book of different things to do together, build a paper airplane and fly it across the room and do Sudoku puzzle. And one of the activities in the book was to ask each other this, that if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you have? And I remember the question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said because that moment, for whatever reason, I thought it was a good time. Let me just check this one quick thing on my phone. And by the time I looked up, she was gone. And I clear message that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was. And she went to go to play with some toy outside. And that's when I realized my own relationship with distraction. And that was kind of the impetus to write this book, was to figure out, man, if I'm doing this with her, where else am I doing this? At work, when I would say I was going to work on this big project and I would get distracted and do something else. I would do it when I would say, oh, I'm definitely going to eat right. I'm definitely going to exercise today. Didn't, and I wouldn't. And so that kind of got me on this journey. And so I guess the brave thing that I did was that I went back to her and I apologized, right? To say like, hey, I was wrong here. Okay. I messed up. As parents, we're supposed to have all the answers and tell my daughter, hey, look, I'm really sorry. I was not my best, and I would really love to know what superpower. And she told me later on that the superpower she would want is the power to be kind. That was the most want, not to fly like Superman or whatever other superpowers, but the power to be kind. And that, of course, melted my heart. And it actually message of Indistractable because being kind is not an incredible superpower. You don't need to be bit by a rabies like Spider-Man. You don't need, to be born on an alien planet like Superman. To be kind is something that we can all. Of course, the same goes for being indistractable. That it's a choice that we can make that decision to be kind or to be indistractable.
When you see the next generation of kids, right, your children and the next generation of children, I think, what are your first of all, your hopes, and then secondly, what are your fears for them in as they grow up?
I think my hope is that they have a sense of agency. I think that having a belief in your own power change things is incredibly important. In the psychology literature, we call this an internal versus an external locus of control. And we know that differentiation, this dichotomy of people who believe that their life is controlled by circumstances outside themselves versus people circumstances are controlled by things inside themselves. So personal agency versus kind of doing whatever the world has given you, fate. People who believe in agency are better off in almost every conceivable metric. They live longer, healthier, more productive lives by believing in their agency, even when it's not there. So that's the kicker. If it's true, and it clearly is, I'm not uh, a blind optimist to say, oh, everything is in your control. It's not in your control. You're discriminated against as an ethnic minority or as a particular gender or orientation. There are problems that are not your fault, clearly. But even if that's the case, it never serves us to think we're victims. It never serves us to think of ourselves as victims, to think that the world has done this to us. It always is better to believe that you have agency. And so that's my wish and my fear for this generation is that they lose this sense of agency. And so the more we can help our kids understand, have a role to play, a huge role, the biggest role to play comes down to you and your choices.
Wow, that was amazing, and I really appreciate you sharing that hope for our children and next generation. On that note, I'd love to wrap things up by, I think, summarizing the three big themes that I got from this conversation. The first that really came through was really fighting for agency, right? Personal accountability, ownership, and being thoughtful about a world where there are financial incentives, there's the industry players, and all the various games that folks are playing, uh, but never forgetting about that personal sense of responsibility, and being thoughtful about the fact that the human condition is a function of pain management and escape from discomfort. So really thoughtful, I think, philosophy that I think actually makes it much easier for me to now that I think about it. I think the value core, I think, across both the books, Hooked and Indistractable.
I
The second I
appreciate it.
really enjoyed was free speech and the regulatory uh, point of view on TikTok and social media. I really enjoyed, I think, for example, you sharing about the nuance that you have seen from your moves across geography and time. And also, I think to some extent, how have you changed your point of view in terms of how you want to fight for the rights of children, folks who are easily addicted, um, and undue influence, about the role of government, but also the limits or capability of industry self-regulation, right? For example, in the op-ed that you wrote years ago. Lastly, I think one thing that came up was quite clear was I think the hope for the next generation and our children. Um, I think what really came across for me in this conversation was I think these books are not only just ways for product designers or individuals to live life today. But I think, I really think they are a stake in the ground to fight for the next generation in terms of the values. And I really appreciated your story about how you chose to be brave, right? To be present with your child again and admitting your error. So I really love everything you shared.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to run here for my next call, but it was wonderful to be with you. Thank you for having me.